This short documentary will be exploring the events of the torture and murder of a 2-year-old boy. Viewer discretion is advised. More than 25 years after this surveillance image was first released to the public, it remains etched into the minds of millions of people who are familiar with the James Bulger case. To those who aren't familiar, the scene looks harmless enough. 2 boys leading a toddler, one holding his hand as they make their way through a normal shopping mall in Bootle, England. The older boys, John Venables and Robert Thompson, seem like they could be brothers of the toddler, James Bulger, as some bystanders thought in the mall that day. But they weren't. Instead, they were the toddler's abductors and soon, his killers. Within hours of this surveillance image being captured on the afternoon of February 12, 1993, 10-year-olds John Venables and Robert Thompson had tortured 2-year-old James Bulger to death. In the time between when that image was captured and when James Bulger was killed on a railway embankment a few miles away, the 3 boys had been seen walking around the area by dozens of people. Many of these witnesses later admitted that Bulger looked distressed. Some even saw the older boys punch and kick the 2-year-old. But most did nothing, and those that stopped and questioned the 2 boys soon enough let them go on their way to ultimately murder the toddler. The boys ended up at the New Strand shopping center in Bootle, near Liverpool, on the afternoon of February 12th, after having skipped school that day. At the mall, the soon-to-be killers wandered from shop to shop, stealing anything they could get their hands on. At some point, for reasons that still remain unclear more than 2 decades later, Venables and Thompson decided to find a child to abduct, lead him to the busy road alongside the shopping center, and push him into the path of oncoming traffic. James Bulger was not the first child that the pair tried to abduct. Inside the shopping center, a woman noticed that 2 boys were trying to get her kid's attention. Moments later, her 3-year-old daughter and 2-year-old son were missing. The mother quickly found her daughter, but there was no sign of her son. Frantically, she asked her daughter where he was. "Gone outside with the boy," she said. The woman began calling for her son and ran outside, where she found Venables and Thompson beckoning the boy to follow them. When Venables saw the mother, they told the boy to go back to her and they vanished. Mere luck had saved the boy. Soon after the aborted abduction, Venables and Thompson were loitering around a snack kiosk hoping to steal candy when they noticed James Bulger by the door of a nearby butcher shop. With Bulger's mother, Denise, momentarily distracted, they got the toddler to come with them. Venables took him by the hand. Several shoppers later remembered noticing the trio as they walked through the mall. They were caught by a surveillance camera leaving the mall at 3:42 p.m. By this time, Denise was panicking. She had thought that her son was by her side as she was placing her order at the butcher shop, but when she looked down, he was gone. She quickly found mall security personnel and described her son and what he was wearing. At first, they announced the boy's name over the mall's loudspeaker. By 4:15, however, there was no sign of James Bulger, and he was reported missing to the local police station. Meanwhile, after Venables, Thompson, and Bulger had left the mall, the toddler began crying out for his mother. The older boys ignored him and continued down a secluded area near a canal. At the canal, they dropped Bulger on his head and left him on the ground crying. A woman passing by noticed Bulger, but did nothing. Venables and Thompson then called for Bulger to come, and still he followed. By now, however, his forehead was bruised and cut, causing Venables and Thompson to pull the hood of the toddler's coat over his head to try to hide his injury. Nevertheless, additional passerby could still see the partially covered forehead injury, and one person even saw a tear on Bulger's cheek, but no one did anything. The older boys then meandered around Liverpool past shops, buildings, and parking lots. They walked down one of Liverpool's busiest streets. Some witnesses later remembered seeing Bulger resisting and screaming for his mother. One person even saw Thompson kick Bulger in the ribs for resisting. Still, no one did anything. Soon after, a woman saw Thompson punch Bulger and shake him, but she pulled her curtains and blocked out the scene. But one bystander proved a glimmer of hope, however fleeting. With evening approaching, an elderly woman saw Bulger crying, noticed his injuries, and approached the trio to inquire what was wrong. But the 2 10-year-olds claimed that they found Bulger by himself near the canal. Apparently satisfied with their explanation, the woman simply told the 2 boys to take the toddler down to the nearby Walton Lane police station. She called out to them once more as they walked away, but they did not look back. She was concerned, but another woman standing nearby said she heard James laughing moments ago, and so both assumed nothing was wrong. Later that night, one of the women saw on the news that Bulger was missing. She phoned the police and expressed regret for not doing something. Not long after the elderly woman sent the boys on their way, Bulger was almost rescued yet again. A woman concerned for the toddler told Venables and Thompson that she would take the child to the police station herself. But when she asked another woman nearby to look after her daughter while she did so, the woman refused because her dog did not like children. And so Bulger slipped away from safety once again. Venables, Thompson, and Bulger then walked into two different stores where they interacted with both shopkeepers who, though suspicious of the older boys, let them go. Then Venables and Thompson came upon two older boys that they knew. These boys asked who the toddler was, and Venables replied that he was Thompson's brother and they were taking him home. Eventually, the boys arrived in the village of Walton, and with Walton Lane Police Station across the road facing them, they hesitated and led Bulger up a steep bank to a railway line near the disused Walton and Anfield Railway Station, where they began the brutal torture and murder of James Bulger. It is believed that this occurred sometime between 5:45 and 6:30 p.m. Venables and Thompson had brought blue paint which they had stolen from the shopping mall and splashed it in Bulger's left eye. They then kicked him, pummeled him with bricks and stones, and stuffed batteries into his mouth. Finally, the boys hit Bulger over the head with a 22-pound iron bar, which resulted in 10 skull fractures. All in all, Bulger sustained 42 injuries to his face, head, and body. He was so badly battered, authorities later concluded that there was no way to tell which injury represented the fatal blow. Eventually, Venables and Thompson placed Bulger's dead body across the train tracks in hope of making the whole thing look like an accident. A forensic pathologist later concluded that the toddler was dead at this point. The next day, police searched the canal where the boys had been earlier in the afternoon after an eyewitness had reported seeing Bulger there. Other searches were conducted elsewhere, all leading to nothing. With little to go on, Bulger's parents were suspects initially, but when the police eventually saw the CCTV footage from the shopping mall, they could not believe their eyes. Despite the fuzzy footage, it was clear to see that the toddler's abductors were in fact also children. Once those CCTV images were released to the media, the story went nationwide and the search for Bulger intensified. When Bulger's father, Ralph, saw that it was just two boys with whom his son had left the mall, he was relieved. I looked at Denise and smiled with relief. "He's gonna be alright, Denise," I said. "He's with two young kids. He's gonna be alright." The search ended 2 days after the disappearance when 4 children discovered Bulger's body on the railway track, just 200 yards from the nearest police station. All of the instruments used in the attack were found strewn across the area, the iron bar, stones, and bricks, all covered in the boys' blood. The stolen tin of blue paint was found nearby. With some evidence in hand and the knowledge that the James Bulger killers were likely 2 children, the police checked nearby schools' absentee lists for the day of the disappearance. This caused various children to be identified as potential killers, with some parents even reporting their own kids. But it was ultimately an anonymous phone call to the police which resulted in John Venables and Robert Thompson being identified as the killers. The caller told the police that Venables and Thompson were both absent from school on Friday and that they themselves had seen blue paint on the sleeve of Venables' jacket. The police then visited both children's homes and discovered blood on Thompson's shoes and blue paint on Venables' jacket. Both boys were then arrested. Despite this evidence, however, Venables and Thompson weren't initially the authorities' prime suspects. Police were focused on other children who already had violent records, and they remained convinced that the 2 boys from the fuzzy CCTV footage looked 13 or 14, not 10. But during separate police interviews, John Venables and Robert Thompson turned on each other. Over the course of the interviews, which lasted several days, Venables eventually confessed. Thompson, on the other hand, was not such an easy interview. He totally denied everything, said Detective Sergeant Phil Roberts. But, in the end, he shot himself in the foot by giving me a detailed account of what James Bulger was wearing. Nevertheless, throughout the whole process, Thompson remained chillingly unfazed, earning him the nickname, "the boy who did not cry," from the press. Venables and Thompson were both charged for the murder of James Bulger. 9 months later, the trial began. Outside the courthouse, people called for the blood of the killers. "Kill the bastards," people yelled. Popular disgust only intensified when witnesses in the media noted Thompson's cold, seemingly remorseless behavior at trial, compared with Venables' hysterical outbursts. Thus, it was widely assumed that Thompson was the instigator, even though psychiatrists and authorities have never been able to reach a conclusion on the boys' motives. Blake Morrison, the author of As If, A Crime, a Trial, A Question of Childhood, a book on the trial, points out that Venables had a temper and had been known to lose control and had done some pretty weird things, and it was just as likely that he was the instigator. Moreover, court-appointed psychiatrists determined that the two boys knew right from wrong and weren't sociopaths, but were nevertheless able to uncover any concrete motives, something no professional has been able to confidently determine even in the years since. Motive aside, both John Venables and Robert Thompson were convicted of murder, making them the youngest convicted murderers in modern British history. As the jury foreman read the verdict, Venables and Thompson were sitting in an adult court dock that had been altered so that the boys could see over it. Venables and Thompson were then sentenced to serve at Her Majesty's pleasure, as it is standard protocol for juvenile offenders convicted of murder or manslaughter. This indefinite sentence has no maximum, but does have a minimum to be determined on a case-by-case basis. In this case, it was just 8 years, at which time the boys would be 18. After that point, James Bulger's killers were to be assessed and, if they weren't deemed to be a danger to society, released. By all accounts, Venables and Thompson showed no violent behavior in prison, but instead served their time quietly and without incident. So, when 8 years were up in 2001, both boys were released. Upon their release, John Venables and Robert Thompson were given new identities and granted legal anonymity for life due to the public fury that surrounded their trial and the danger of citizens hunting down the infamous James Bulger killers in order to take vengeance. Today, while Thompson is believed to be assimilating back into society and living a quiet life, the same cannot be said of Venables. In 2010, he was imprisoned for downloading images depicting various kinds of sexual abuse being inflicted upon male toddlers. He became eligible for parole in 2013, at which point Venables was released. In November of 2017, Venables was again imprisoned after being found to be in possession of more child abuse images. John Venables was sentenced to 3 years and 4 months in prison, not far from half the amount of time he served for joining Robert Thompson in torturing and killing James Bulger a quarter of a century before. What is your opinion? Do you think these two boys should have ever been released for what they did, regardless of whether they were deemed to be a danger to society or not? Let us know your thoughts down below. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with our videos.